We are recording.
Perfect. Okay, we have about 60 attendees logged in now. So I want to go ahead and say good morning. Welcome again to the Optimizing Biological Nutrient Removal in Tennessee Wastewater Treatment Plants webinar series. This is the second webinar of the series. If you don't remember from the previous webinar, my name is Allie Crampton and I will be one of your hosts today. We'll be meeting every Wednesday for the next 5 weeks. Please complete this intro poll. That way, hold on, let me do the poll really quick. This will help minimize the need for you all to email me your info. Hold on, where's my little poll thing? Why? Well, hold on, I'll get that set up in just a second. But a few things first, please notice that you have been muted upon entry. This is to help reduce any background noise. I do hope that you can unmute yourself. I think last time everybody was able to. If you can't, you can just put it in the chat box and I can help with unmuting you if you need that. Another way, we now have another way to ask questions, and that's going to be through the chat box. Like I just said, I think previously we had some issues with the Q&A box, just being a little bit more strict than what people preferred. So we have both options now. You can send questions or statements directly to me or to the other panelists, but please do not send directly to the presenter alone, as you will not be able to see them while in presentation mode, and the panelists and I will be monitoring the chat box and the Q&A section, and we will be able to read those at natural stopping points for him. Also, if you want to, let's go ahead and take the time to see if we can all do the yes/no buttons. So that's going to be the green check mark or the red X. We're going to be doing some more little yes/no polls, I think, throughout this, just to make sure people are still are up to speed and understanding the content as we go through it. So if you will, just mark a check mark or an X, and I'll wait for everybody to kind of find those. Okay, Mr. Grant, I'm going to take the ball from you so that I can do that first initial, if I can, so that I can do that first initial poll, just so I can get everybody's operator license number, since some people are viewing in groups. Can you pass me the ball?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, Mark, I actually don't have the polling option anymore. I know in our practice I did, but I don't now. So I'm going to need you to pass the ball to me since you're the host.
Sure thing. I'm working on it right now.
Thank you.
Do you know where I can do that? I can't find where I share.
There's the little, okay, so up on the top where it says participant chat and then Q&A, there should be a little drop down arrow that says polls, or it should say manage panels.
I'm on polls right now.
Okay, there will be, you can see the intro poll, you can click it, and I think it says start poll.
Let me see.
What?
I see the poll. I don't see the start poll option. 1 second. I'm not seeing the start poll option. I'm sorry. I'm looking at the poll intro. Do you know where it would say start poll?
Hey, you're good. I'm sorry. I was actually talking to myself, but I had it on mute. Let's go ahead and skip forward, and that way Grant can get going. And we can do that at another point. We'll figure it out on the side, Mark.
Okay. Okay.
So, Mr. Grant, as previously mentioned in the last webinar, actually really likes your all's engagement and prefers that you guys interrupt with questions. So if at any point during his presentation you have a question that needs to be answered, he always wants you to know that you should feel free and be able to do that. Like before, we will have 3 polls for you to answer. Well, I guess technically 4 once we get this other one situated. The one in the middle will be a little bit longer, probably about like 3 to 5 minutes, and that will allow you to take a quick break after you've answered the poll question. We were able to get approved for 1.5 CEUs for each of these sessions for your wastewater license. So for folks that are viewing this training as a group, I am trying to get this poll set up so that you can just submit those license numbers in the poll, and then that's done. If we can't work through that, then you'll just have to email me with the names and license numbers that are watching with you. So if you have already logged in under your email and submitted your license number, you don't have to send me yours. But this is just for people who are watching like on one computer, but there may be 2 or 3 or 4 people in the same room. Hey, we got a poll question.
Yeah, I think I did that.
Oh, perfect.
Oh, impressive.
That's even better. Good job. Oh, I love this.
All right, Allie, thanks for the introduction there. And while we're working on the poll, I do want to welcome Grant. It is my pleasure to partner with Grant again and bring you the fantastic nutrient training that he puts on and has been doing across the nation. Grant has been working with various plants in the U.S. With their operators to optimize nutrient removal. He is a professional engineer and a licensed operator. Now, he's also a rare breed because he loves the numbers and the people. So I had the good fortune to work with Grant here in Tennessee since 2014. And today, Grant will teach us more about biological phosphorus removal. So as you are here to watch, and you hopefully attended last time, you kind of know what to expect. We really welcome your interaction. We welcome any questions you have now or later. And we really, really appreciate the time you give us to spend with us. So thank you very, very much. And I'm going to say, hey, Grant, the floor is yours whenever we are ready. So you can take it away from here. And thank you for spending time with us here on the WebEx and really making our day more enjoyable by getting a different perspective. So thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you. What should I do, Allie? You want me to go to my screen, share my desktop? Does that do anything with the polling? I'm ready to get into it, but I don't want to mess up whatever I stumbled my way into here.
I think the poll's fine. It should close on its own. You're welcome to share your screen now.
Okay, are we good? Everybody can hear me. You can see the screen, and somewhere on your screen, I guess you get to watch me, unless you figure out how to get that out of your life. Last week I showed opening slide was Middle Tennessee. Thought we'd go to East Tennessee this week. We'll do West next week. I don't want to leave anybody out. So I guess this is what awaits us when this winter weather is over. As mentioned, I really like questions and comments and interruptions. So please feel free to speak up in any way you want. You can unmute yourself, or you can type in a comment and it'll be read to me. But again, I can't see anything that's written. So if you send it to me, it's going to get lost. The electrons aren't going to deliver it to me. Today we're going to talk about phosphorus removal. There's a little bit of heavy lifting that goes on in this phosphorus removal discussion. So we'll try to make it as entertaining as possible. I think so far we've done a great job entertaining you in the last 15 minutes. Last week we talked about nitrogen removal, very similar discussion. So you put the two together. Next week we'll do a little review, and then it'll become more, a lot more enjoyable. So at the feedback I always get when we get into the case studies. So we'll be talking about treatment plants around the country. We'll focus on Tennessee treatment plants that have changed their day-to-day operations to get better nitrogen and phosphorus removal. And the big focus is working on plants that are not necessarily designed for nitrogen and phosphorus removal. And people are being creative. Operators are thinking in advance of the new permit limits and making serious headway, which is going to save them a lot of time and money when the permits are issued. And of course, there's no better time to do this experimentation than before the permit limits, because you have the opportunity to have some excursions. The state supports this effort. They're funding this series, and they're funding, as Karina said, for several years we've been working together. After we do the next week, then we'll get into technologies, talk about nutrient removal in oxidation ditches, sequencing batch reactors, and conventional and extended aeration activated sludge. And then what is always the favorite session is, I think that's St. Patrick's Day, so we'll have to wear green. We'll be talking about some treatment plants in Tennessee, and we'll brainstorm as a group. We'll invite the operators of those facilities to speak. So if anyone's interested in doing that, we've already got 3 lined up. You can email me, Allie, anybody you know. My email address is going to keep popping up throughout this, so you'll be able to find me. Like, there it is right there. So are there any questions or comments from last week's before I get on nitrogen, before I get started on phosphorus? And if there are, I'll do my best to talk my way around them. Hearing none, I'm going to keep going, and those who are providing me all the great behind-the-scenes support can always interrupt my presentation. A little bit of science here before we get into the technology behind phosphorus removal. If you watched last week, you saw the same slide. I'm a big fan of ORP. ORP is oxidation reduction potential. It's an instrument that looks a lot like a DO probe. It connects to the same meter. Or if you have them inline, they can be switched out with your inline controllers. ORP, the beauty of this instrument is actually measures the ion exchange, the electron exchange. So it measures what's happening with the oxygen in an aeration tank. If there's a lot of use of the oxygen, the bacteria are breathing free oxygen, we get a high positive ORP number. If it's anaerobic conditions and the bacteria have to work real hard to break oxygen off of sulfate or nitrate, some kind of combined form of oxygen, the ORP will go negative. The DO, of course, only goes down to that 0 level, and it doesn't help you in anoxic and anaerobic conditions. You're flying blind. Bad news with an ORP is it's not completely reproducible. The numbers change. Same instrument a little bit day to day, instrument to instrument, and the inorganic quality of the water affects it. So one wastewater might have a slightly different reading. But really, I've seen maybe 10, 15 numbers on there. So a 0 and a positive 25 and a minus 25 are pretty much all the same number. But you get far out there, and it's a very helpful tool. Now, I really like this chart. I stole this from YSI years ago, and I keep using it. Today, we're going to be talking about 2 ORP environments. One is, I like to use the word fermentation because we're just short of going completely anaerobic and creating methane gas. In fact, the materials that we're going to be looking for, these volatile fatty acids that get produced in fermented conditions, they're the acids in the acid alkalinity ratio if you have an anaerobic digester. So we want a sour digester. If you have an anaerobic digester, you don't want these acids. But for us, they're the food source. More on that in a minute. And then after we create the food source and we get the bacteria, the right bacteria to chow down on them in these anaerobic or fermentive conditions, then those energized bacteria are going to move into aerobic conditions. And again, the ORP is a great tool to measure how much free oxygen there is and tell us about the environment for that phase of the phosphorus removal. Any questions or comments on that? All right.
Hey, Grant. Well, Grant, what I'd like to do, I think now is a good time to pause and try to take the yes/no question on how many people actually use ORP in their plant, so that you have an idea of what our audience is using. So let's
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
So use the check mark, the green check mark as a yes if you are using ORP meter or ORP numbers in your plant. Positive or negative doesn't matter. It's just if you're using the ORP at all. So I'm gonna give you about a minute if you can stand it to get your answers. Now remember, you have to uncheck what you have done before. So click what you've answered before and then click back what you guys are using. Green is yes. Red is no. Green check mark is yes, using ORP. Red X is no, we are not using ORP in our plant. So if you would, please click what you know you're doing in your plant. And there is not a right or wrong answer. You're not graded on which answer you pick here, okay?
Oh, that's not true. We're watching. Oh, yeah.
All right, we have quite a few people answered already. We'll give it a little bit more, but not much more. I'm going to get a result. We have 23 yes. We have 17 no.
Wow.
We have 78 participants, which some of these folks do not get to use ORP meters because they do not have a wastewater plant of their own, okay? So it's a pretty good return on the numbers. Thank you very much, and we're looking about 23 yeses.
Okay, so half and half, round numbers.
Yes, we're good to go. Thank you,
All right,
everybody.
thanks.
You can unclick your answers.
Unclick your answers, and now we're going to try to do our first polling question, and it looks like I'm going to need to jump into this. Does that sound right?
I think I actually was able to take back being host, so I think Mark is still just recording, but I have control of polls now.
Okay, can we see the last one? How it turned out?
Let me look. We had, well, nobody said that they were experts, and I think the majority, 26 out of 77, selected option 3, 24 selected option 2, and 14 people selected option 1. 11 people did not answer.
Okay, well, that was the polling question that we would be doing right now. So what's your pleasure?
I have a little bit of technical here. Some folks cannot do the check marks because they're on their phones. So we appreciate all that. If you want to send me a chat, when you send everybody a chat. If you cannot do a check mark, that's fine. And that may be the same case for the polls. If they're not popping up on the phone, feel free to send it in your chat, okay? And we really appreciate your participation. It doesn't have to be all in the polls and all in the check marks. Just however you interact with us is great. Thank you.
I can go ahead and do the original intro poll, Grant, if I can take the ball back from you.
So I give it to you? Oh, you just took it.
Okay. I think I just commandeered it.
That's great.
There we go. Can you guys see that?
Yes, we can see it, and it looks like we can type in. That's really nice. Thank you.
Awesome.
There.
Perfect, perfect, perfect.
All right. If you want to give it back to me while people are typing in their numbers, or does that eliminate their ability to
I
do
mean, I think we have 2 people in progress, so I'll let them finish up, and then I will close it and send it back to you, if that's okay. Let's see. Or I guess it will close on its own, probably.
Yeah, in 3 minutes.
Oh. Okay. Let me close poll. Sorry, it takes a few seconds to close the poll as it's gathering responses.
All right, we good?
I think so.
All right, great. All right, what do we first do before we get into the weeds here? Let's just do a real quick discussion of 2 plants in Tennessee that have improved phosphorus removal by changing the way they're operated. I just picked 2 out of, you see I have 5 listed there. I think last week I did 2 or 3 out of the nitrogen optimization. We'll get into more details in our next session on all of these. So the first one is Athens. Athens has the Orbital ditches. Let's see if I can get my little drawing tool here, and I apologize for that little gray spot over there, but we'll just play like it's not there. So here's the Orbital ditches at the Athens treatment plant. And Athens for years was applying chemicals or phosphorus removal during the summer months. It was kind of ironic, unfortunate for them that during the cooler months of the year, they really didn't need to add chemicals, but they had more restrictive limits in the summertime. So that's when they were adding chemicals. And then about 3, 4, maybe 5 years ago, we'll see here on the graph that follows, they set up a side stream fermenter where they were using one of these old clarifiers that are no longer in use, and they were pumping sludge in and out of that to get side stream biological phosphorus removal. And here on this chart, you can see where they began, and of course, the numbers climbed up a bit, but they're getting better every year as they get a full control over this. And of course, this is it's the people at the plant, Greg Hayes and Russell Coleman at the Bustanala plant that really have taken a chance. They were very proud of their facility. It had won some kind of zero permit violation award from some AMSA or some organization for years and years, and they took a chance of perhaps violating their permit while they tried to go chemical-free, more sustainable treatment. And it's working out for them. So they were an early advocate for this, an early win for the effort, a great team to work with. Harriman, which has been fantastic to work with Ray Freeman and Harriman, He started working with John West of TDEC out of the regional office years ago, years before I had the pleasure of meeting anybody and getting involved. It's a simple oxidation ditch, and in Harriman Ray, at John's suggestion, in fact, I think even before Ray showed up, some of the staff, Ray's been there for, I don't know, Ray, if you're tuned in, you can correct me, maybe 4 or 5 years. I think you've been there now. Prior to your arrival, John was working with some of the staff, and they started cycling some of those aerator rotors on and off. And let me use my little tool here again. So the rotors are these white structures here. So he's cycling the rotors on and off for better nitrogen removal, and we're actually seeing better phosphorus removal. With all the rotors off, the mixed liquor is actually settling a little bit in the ditch between air-on cycles, creating deposition, which are almost anaerobic enough. Well, they are anaerobic enough to create the food source for the bacteria that remove phosphorus. And then just look at these numbers here. So there's Ray, and there's this Yahoo that's talking to you with the straw hat. Nitrogen numbers are tremendous over the years. Have dropped it from over 20 to just over 2, so a 90% drop. And phosphorus has been cut pretty much in half, right? From around just under 3 to just under 1.5. By simply changing the way the facility's operated. Now, like the Cookville example I shared last week, because the rotors are not operating as much, there's electrical savings as well. So getting better treatment, more sustainably, and saving money. Pretty good deal. So with that, I hopefully got your interest in what might be possible in your facilities. I know both of those were oxidation ditches. They're not all oxidation ditches that are getting great numbers, as you'll see next week. But now we're going to work. Let's talk about phosphorus removal and how it happens. So the whole idea of phosphorus removal is to convert the soluble phosphorus to bacteria form if we're doing it biologically, and if we're using chemicals, it moves also into the mixed liquor, which would then be in the TSS if we weren't controlling it in our clarifiers prior to discharge. So we're going to convert the soluble form to a particulate and then settle it out. And if you think about it, that's pretty much what we're doing with everything in a wastewater treatment plant. And in fact, what really goes on is soluble pollutants are food for bacteria. And once we get past the screening, floating, sedimentation part of it prior to biological, our whole job is to create habitats to grow bacteria. They suck the pollutants out of the wastewater. Those little idiots think it's food. And as they do, they grow and multiply. And really, as a byproduct of us growing bacteria is clean water. So our emphasis should be on growing the bacteria, and as they do, they suck those pollutants out of the water. And then we remove that in our clarifiers. So there's 3 steps to biological phosphorus removal. I'd like to run through these first as a little background. As I mentioned a moment ago, the bacteria, they're really fussy eaters. I like to compare them to the panda bears at the National Zoo. Now, I've had I don't know if it's the fortune or misfortune of being in Washington, D.C. a few times, so I've never been to the National Zoo, so I've never seen a panda bear in person, but we all seem to know what panda bears eat. Panda bears eat bamboo shoots, right? No bamboo shoots, no panda bears. Frozen spinach ain't gonna cut it. You don't have fresh bamboo shoots, you got dead panda bears, you got crying kids, and the politicians could probably come together for a moment and figure out a way to get us some bamboo shoots so we wouldn't have those. Well, the same thing here. The bacteria that remove phosphorus, they may not be as cute and cuddly as the panda bears. Nobody's going to pay money to look at them. But they eat volatile fatty acids. No volatile fatty acids, no biological phosphorus removal. So we create those in anaerobic or fermentive conditions. Again, just short of truly anaerobic conditions, because if we go all the way anaerobic, we're taking these volatile fatty acids, which are almost methane. They're very short chain molecules. And when we go anaerobic, create methane gas, we're destroying the volatile fatty acids. So we want to go just short of that. We want a sour digester. Then also in fermentive conditions, no air, we got to bring the bacteria that are going to feed on these volatile fatty acids and bring them to the table, if you will. So this is going to happen, bring the mixed liquor, subject it, introduce the volatile fatty acids, commingle them in zero oxygen conditions. As they do, they will energize. They won't grow, but they'll take in the energy. And as they do, they actually release phosphorus into the water, which can be a real good process control tool, which I intend to get into before lunch here today. And finally, now you got your energized BioP bugs. I like to call them, smarter people call them PAOs, phosphate accumulating organisms. These bacteria, now you subject them to strongly aerobic conditions, and they're going to grow like crazy. And as they do, they suck almost all the phosphorus out of solution as they grow and reproduce. And voila, all your soluble phosphorus is now inside the wee little bodies of these bacteria, and you've got it in your mixed liquor. I'm frankly pretty frustrated. I guess I've given this presentation enough now that my frustration level is not what it used to be when I first gave this, but we have so complicated this biological phosphorus removal, and I want to simplify it because I think it serves people's purposes that don't help us as operators, the complications. We're concerned about the soluble form of phosphorus. We want to get rid of that. I'm going to talk some more about that. I'm going to beat that message into you here today. And the $10 way of saying that is orthophosphate or ortho-P. That's soluble phosphorus. There's all these other ways to say it or write it. But in my mind, and in your mind, I'd like you to think of two types of phosphorus in our business: soluble phosphorus and the phosphorus that's in the TSS. So the phosphorus that's in the TSS, of course, is either there in and with the bacteria, if it's biological, or if it's chemical, it's as a precipitant. So you add the amount of phosphorus that will pass through a filter, that would be the soluble, to the amount of phosphorus that's in the material that won't pass through the filter, that's the particulate, and you get the total phosphorus, which is what our permit limit is typically written at. Now, if you get down to crazy low numbers in your phosphorus limit, like way below 0.5, then some of the other forms of soluble phosphorus might come into play. But that really doesn't until you're down to 0.2 or less. So for all practical purposes, we're concerned about orthophosphate. That's our process control parameter that we're interested in. We want to get rid of that, as much of that as we can. The nice thing is that's a quick and easy test to do if you have a spectrophotometer. It only takes 10 minutes to do the test. All right, so I'm going to give you an example because what my ire does for me is I open any magazine or go to any conference and people are talking about these incredible, fancy, complicated systems to remove phosphorus, which include filtration. And I want to I want to push back against that and underscore my position that our first step is controlling the soluble phosphorus. So bear with me. This is Grant's little chip on his shoulder here for the next couple minutes. So I'm going to give you an example. Fairly typical influent concentration of phosphorus, 6 or 7. If there's a lot of infiltration inflow, obviously that number is lower. Typical effluent, if the influence around 6 is around 3. So there's about 3 milligrams per liter of the phosphorus in a typical plant that just gets used up, becomes part of the bacteria that you grow as part of your mixed liquor. So my example, I'm going to use an effluent TSS of 15. And again, I'm going back to that. I'm going to do the math here. You don't need to know any of this math. I just want to, at the end, I got a couple of graphs, and they're going to drive home my message. So in a typical plant that's not doing chemical phosphorus removal, that's not doing biological phosphorus, that has those kind of numbers up above, if it has a total effluent phosphorus of 3, how much of that 3 is particulate and how much of it is soluble? Well, we're going to work that through, and I'm going to give you the answer. Typically, about 1% of living organisms by dry weight is phosphorus. That's you, me, bacteria in your treatment plant, and the trees and grass growing at your facility. About 1% by dry weight is phosphorus. Since the effluent total phosphorus is the sum of the soluble, that which goes through the filter and that which doesn't, then the particulate in this 15 milligrams per liter, you do 1% of that, that's 0.15, but I said the effluent's 3, so you take the 3, you subtract the 0.15. Okay, what's filtration going to be doing for you at this facility? Almost nothing, right? Because almost all of your phosphorus is soluble, like shown in this graph. So if you want to put in filtration before you attack the soluble, you're working on trying to reduce this green part on the left. So obviously the first step is to get rid of the soluble phosphorus, make it into a particulate, and then, if need be, think about filtration. All right, let's continue with the same example. If you're doing a bang-up job, and of course after this seminar, I think I expect within 30 minutes that at least 50% of you are going to be doing it. If you take the same influent characteristics, the same effluent TSS, but during that treatment plant, you're doing a bang-up job removing the phosphorus, biologically or chemically. You're getting it out of solution. It's really possible to bring down that soluble fraction to a crazy low number, about 0.05. Plants that are dialing in their chemical and or biological phosphorus removal, the soluble fraction drops from that 2.85 in a typical plant, as I described here, example plant, down to 0.05. Which means the remaining portion now is a bit higher because as the bacteria, or if it's chemical, the phosphorus concentration is now higher percentage-wise. So instead of being 1% phosphorus, maybe as high as 5. Now, I've never seen that, but the textbooks use that number. I've seen, I think, 3.8% is the highest I've seen, but heck with that. Let's run with 5. So let's figure out if by taking that soluble and making it into particulate, and that 15 milligrams per liter of TSS, 5% of that is phosphorus, what happens? Well, the soluble, like I said, drops to 0.05, but 5% of the 15 milligrams per liter, the effluent TSS, so there's 0.75. Now we have a total of 0.8. Look at this graph, totally different. Now, if you're doing a bang-up job converting the soluble to a particulate, and if that particulate gets as high as 5%, and if that isn't good enough to meet your permit limit or your goal, now filtration makes sense, right? Now we want to take down that 15 milligrams per liter of effluent TSS to a lower number, and we're going to get a return on that. Putting the two side by side, the particulate fraction before and after, you do a good job biological phosphorus removal, and then the red one is the soluble fraction before and after. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. I got the message driven home that we really want to focus first on getting rid of that soluble phosphorus, and then if that isn't good enough, then we got to think about what we can do with the effluent TSS. One last thing here before I'll break and see if there's any questions. I had a couple of notes kind of pop up here in front of me, but I wasn't really able to read them. I really like this chart. I don't know, maybe it's confusing, but let me pull down my little tool here. Oops. Before I do that, I want to get up. There we go. Sorry about what this does to your screen. We're not smart enough here, this team that's managing this, to figure out how to get those little hash marks out of there. But so if you have a limit, right, that you're trying to meet, and it's 1, using these ratios I just talked about, where 5% of your effluent TSS would be phosphorus, which I believe to be very much on the high side, you can have an effluent TSS of 19 as long as you're dialing in that soluble removal. So an effluent TSS of 19, if you're doing a real good job of removing the soluble and converting it to TSS, and you can still meet a 1 limit. So a 0.5, if you're single-digit effluent, theoretically, if you can manage the soluble phosphorus, you should be able to meet a 0.5 limit. So the way I figure plants without filtration, without a major upgrade, if you can bring in biological phosphorus removal, if you have a single-digit effluent, your odds are pretty good you can bring it down. So are there any questions or comments? Not hearing anything. Is anybody there?
Grant, this is Bree. We had one comment pop up in the chat box. Albert Solberg said back in July they had an influent phosphorus of 3.0 and an effluent of 4.7. And he's asking, is it normal to gain phosphorus in the plant?
No, there's some theory. Whose theory is that Newton, that matter cannot be created? We'll talk about how that happened. He got, for that to occur, there was a phosphorus release somewhere, and as bacteria die and their cells open up, all kinds of goo comes out, and in and with that goo is phosphorus. So something happened that there was a release of phosphorus in the treatment plant without the uptake. I think I forgot what plant Albert's with, but I think he's one of the plants we're visiting. So we'll be able to work with him and hopefully sleuth that out. But that's a good comment. From time to time, you'll see that, particularly in phosphorus, that sometimes the effluent is higher than the influent. Pretty maddening. Hopefully, you'll have some hints as to why that happened by the end of the next hour. Is there anything else?
This is Karina. I want to point out that it happened in July. So we're talking about summertime in Tennessee. So that's, I think some of that may play a role as well.
Okay. And we'll talk about that too, the seasonality of it. All right, if not, I'll keep going. If anything comes up, just interrupt me, please. And again, my email address is at the bottom. So anybody, anytime, once we meet on one of these webinars, I figure we're a team. So from then on, I'm available. Just send me a note if you care to about anything. Now we have one of these survey questions. And I think Allie is on top of this. She's going to take it from me. And
Yep, I am on it right now. I am now the presenter. Okay.
this is the one where we're going to take a little break, right?
That is correct, yes.
We should let everybody know how long we're going to break and what time we're getting back together.
I think we said 5 minutes.
Okay, so it's 10:51 now. So if I can do this right in my head, that would make it 10:56, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, so everybody wants to take a little break. We'll be back at 10:56, but during that break, back to you, Allie, to tell them what to do during the break.
During your break, if you would please answer the poll question and then also get any kind of beverage or whatever activity you need to do during this break.
My beverage of choice is orange soda or orange pop, whatever you want to call it.
Oh man, my beverage of choice is always coffee and some water with a flavoring packet that has B12 in it.
Wow.
I need all the energy I can get right now.
Well, I'm going to mute myself and turn the camera off if I can figure out how to do that. So. All right, by my clock, we have 1 more minute. Does that sound right?
Yep, we are about ready. Thank you. Do we have the answer to the poll? I noticed on the poll that there is not an option for over 20 years. I wonder what that means. But if you have more than 20 years, use the option D, 10 to 20, and that already signifies a very long career.
Well, I think that's appropriate. I mean, if you've stuck in this business for 20 years, you deserve a D. So that's what I gave myself.
I thought it was just too daring to put any more years in there, right?
It's like, if you haven't gotten it by now. Yeah.
So, yeah, I did put a D there for me. So, you know, I know that I reached the top.
Okay, most of us are in that category. Look at that.
Mm-hmm. The polls are in, the poll results are in. Very, very interesting. Surprisingly low numbers for the newcomers. It's somewhat alarming. And
Yeah.
then there is nothing in the middle, hardly anything in the middle. And then there are the folks that kind of stuck it out and figured this is a good thing to do. So, well, welcome to the club, everybody. Then this is a good place to be.
All right, Al, if you give me the opportunity, I will take back the screen and.
Thank you for the poll, guys.
Thank you all. Need a lot of therapy out there, I think. All right, here we go. So this is Joe Nowak of the Upper Blackstone treatment plant in Massachusetts. I think he's trying to commune with the bacteria here. Well, let's talk about it. I like to use these little schematics. I used them last week for nitrogen removal. I'm a left or right guy. I don't know what that means, but that's the way I go. So we've got the raw wastewater flowing in from the left and the treated wastewater leaving the screen on the right. And many of you may not have primary clarifiers. Frankly, primary clarifiers do more to interfere with biological nutrient removal than they do to help. So consider yourself fortunate, frankly. So the idea here is to talk about what the design engineers do in designing a treatment plant, building a treatment plant that's designed for phosphorus removal. So I'm going to talk through doing it in the mainstream, that is in the main flow of the plant, and then the side stream, which would be down here in the bottom, the gravity thickener and the sludge storage. Those I consider side streams. Even the return sludge would be a side stream. So how it works is you need an anaerobic zone or a fermentive tank, as I've said before. And in this fermentive zone, the influent BOD, the organic loading, the materials would break down, much like they do in a septic tank, frankly. And as they do, they create different kinds of chemical compounds, and there's a family of compounds called volatile fatty acids. You don't really need to manage this except to create sufficiently anaerobic or fermentive conditions. So as the bacteria break down the wastewater, which is much more complicated molecules, into these simpler molecules, then the bacteria that remove phosphorus will feed on them. They'll feed on them in the same tank, and the bacteria get there in the return sludge. See on the bottom of the screen how the return sludge comes around. That's feeding the bacteria. They interact with the volatile fatty acids, and as they do, they release phosphorus in the solution. That PO4 is a symbol for orthophosphate or phosphate, or soluble phosphorus, which is what I like to call it. So the soluble phosphorus actually coming out of this anaerobic tank is going to be higher than it was going into the tank, about 3 times as high. So Albert, here's a little clue as to what's going on. The bacteria, as they break down, they actually release phosphorus in the solution. So the bacteria are energized, but they haven't grown. If you had 10 gazillion bacteria going in there, you still got 10 gazillion. You don't have 20. That is, the bacteria and the soluble phosphorus flow into the aeration tank. Again, a good process control tool. There's 2 of them for the anaerobic tank. One is an ORP. I've got a target there. I like to see it minus 200 on the ORP as a target. And I like to see a phosphorus release. It's about 3 times. So if it's coming in at 7, I'd like to see it in the very high teens or low 20s coming out of that anaerobic tank, soluble phosphorus. That means it's doing its job. Then we go into the aeration tank, and the energized bacteria will grow. And as they grow, they're going to pull soluble phosphorus out of solution, and they concentrate it in their bodies. How and why they do that, I don't know, above my pay grade, but they do. And then we also have conditions for the aerobic tank that we try to meet. And I'm going to give you a slide that summarizes these. But I like to see an ORP of positive 150, and incredibly important is pH. The pH has to be at 6.8 or higher. If it's more acidic, if it's 6.7, biological phosphorus removal stops. So you want to maintain it more around 7 to give you a little bit of comfort zone. You need a pH of around 7. We need an ORP that's aerobic. In fact, the front end of the plant, if it's a plug flow of the aeration basin, it's better to have more dissolved oxygen at the front. Now, that's a mainstream process. The problem, biggest problem with this is that the bacteria that remove the nitrates that might be in that return sludge will outcompete the phosphorus bacteria for those volatile fatty acids. The bacteria that remove nitrates, remember I talked about that last week, go from the NO3 to nitrogen gas. The bacteria that drive that process, they're kind of like me. They'll eat anything. But they prefer volatile fatty acids. These volatile fatty acids, these VFAs, they're their porterhouse steaks. You don't have porterhouse steak, which, by the way, I'm having tonight. Haven't had any for a week, so I'm going to cook some tonight. They'll eat chicken, they'll eat hamburger, but if there's a whole menu of stuff laying out there, they're going to walk right by the chicken and hamburger and that healthy salad that they really should eat. They're going to go right for the porterhouse steak. So if you have nitrates in the wastewater and you have volatile fatty acids, those evil denitrifiers, the bacteria that remove the nitrates, are going to outcompete our friends, the phosphorus removing bacteria. So it's as if you didn't create the volatile fatty acids in the first place. You got the dead panda bear problem here. So some really clever design engineers came up with this concept. We're going to put an anoxic tank ahead of the anaerobic tank. So before we make the volatile fatty acids, we're going to use the influent BOD, the hamburger, and satisfy the majority of the demand for organics that the nitrate-removing bacteria have. And then whatever volatile fatty acids we create in this anaerobic zone will be available to the phosphorus removing. Brilliant. So that's the whole plan. So you create the volatile fatty acids here, Most of the nitrates are gone, so those bacteria, they don't have any nitrates to breathe, so they're not going to be consuming your volatile fatty acids. The bacteria that remove phosphorus are. They're going to release phosphorus into solution. Great process control tool to monitor how much phosphorus, soluble phosphorus, is leaving this tank. The phosphate, the ortho-P, the soluble phosphorus, along with the bacteria, flow through into the aeration tank, and now you're going to get better performance. You're going to get more bang for your VFA buck in phosphorus removal in your aeration tank. So if you were calling this a design technique, this would be an A2O tank. And I did see that note. Okay, so for process control tool for anoxic tank, just like last week for denitrification, for nitrate removal, I like the anoxic tank to be -100 for a target. So an ORP of -100 in the anoxic tank would be my initial target. Every treatment plant's different. You want to dial it in based on your conditions, but I'd start there, -100 in the anoxic, -200 in the anaerobic tank. Not easy to get to -200. We'll talk about some tricks on how you can turbocharge your anaerobic or fermented tank. Now remember, your tank may be labeled one way, but the bacteria, they don't climb out of the tank and read what's on the side and act accordingly. They just exist, all right? They don't have brains. They don't know what they're supposed to be doing. They just know what it feels like. So that's a quick explanation of a mainstream, the AO process and the A2O process, but pretty much any phosphorus removing strategy, that's the concept, that's the base for it. So hopefully that made sense. If not, things are going to slow down for you from the rest of the way. There was a comment that came up here and I missed it. So maybe one of my team members here can repeat that for me.
The only comment that I saw in chat was Lisa asked what the target ORP should be for the anoxic tank, but you just answered that question.
Okay. Okay. All right. Seeing nothing else?
Hey, Grant, would you want to try a yes-no question on some of the numbers on the ORPs?
All right.
You know, is anybody running it at certain minus that you would recommend if they ever are able to reach it at their plant? So you can ask the question and I'll run the tally.
All right, I'm going to do 3 questions then. All right, so I didn't really talk about the target in the aeration zone, but we'll talk about that too. That'll be the 3rd question. So the first question is, if you have an anoxic zone and you have an ORP, is -100 a target that works for you? Yes or no? -100 provides you with decent anoxic conditions. That's the target I like to use, that or more negative. I've seen circumstances where you can be at 0 and have good nitrate removal, but man, I like to see it nice and negative. So that was my first question.
Okay, so you're asking for, are you getting -100 or more with your ORP?
In your anoxic.
In your anoxic, okay. Okay, I don't expect a whole lot of answers on this because not everybody runs ORPs, so this is just to kind of get an idea. But
right.
We are getting 4 yeses and 1 no. Yeah, now we're at 2 and 2. It kind of changes. So we do have to maybe getting the -100.
All right, so maybe the rest of my questions don't really work. Do you have a question that you want to put out there, Karina?
I think they're good here at this point. You know, we're seeing that we don't have a bunch of people getting the negatives.
Let's go on.
There is a reason for that, right? I mean,
Right.
We're trying to do phosphorus removal, so not everybody's doing that just yet. Very good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. So my targets would be -100 for the anoxic zone or more negative, -200 for the fermentive zone or anaerobic zone or more negative, and then +150 for the aeration zone. Those would be the 3 targets that I would begin with if I was starting anew, trying to figure out how to dial it in. Now, the other design concept that people, the engineering communities come up with, and this is a picture of the, I can't remember where it is, Missoula, Montana treatment facility. Very complicated facility. Montana has several that are called the modified Johannesburg. A lot of tanks. One of the guys figured he had over a mile of handrails in his treatment plant. So now we're going to talk about a combination of side stream and mainstream. So off to the side, we're going to create the volatile fatty acids, and then we're going to bring those volatile fatty acids, inject them into the treatment plant. Gives us a little better process control because we can actually make the food source and meter it in, if you will. So when this is done in a plant designed for phosphorus removal, the gravity thickener is either abandoned or turned into a fermenter, or there's a companion way of dealing with the primary sludge, and they call it a fermenter. Now, a fermenter, if any of you have gravity thickeners, fermenter is little different than a gravity thickener. And a gravity thickener is little different than a mini clarifier. Takes the sludge from a primary clarifier and gives it another chance to remove some of the supernatant off the top. So a fermenter takes the sludge from a primary clarifier, raw wastewater sludge, leaves it in a vessel, open top vessel, for a couple days retention time, typically. And as it's in there, it's septic. Not so septic as you create very much methane gas, because again, that would be destroying the volatile fatty acids. But septic enough that a lot of the primary sludge is converted to volatile fatty acids. So a facility designed with side stream would have a separate tank, and they would create volatile fatty acids in this tank, and then that would be fed into the treatment plant, into the main flow, into an anaerobic tank. So you'd have a primary clarifier followed by an anaerobic tank. They call it anaerobic. Again, I don't like that word. It's technically really a fermenter. So the volatile fatty acids get created, they get pumped in. The bacteria, the phosphorus removing bacteria that are growing and living in and with your mixed liquor, they're coming back as return sludge from the bottom of your clarifier. So they're reseeding this anaerobic tank with mixed liquor that contains the bio-P bugs, the PAOs. So in these fermentive conditions in this so-called anaerobic tank, the food's there, and the phosphorus removing bacteria will consume the volatile fatty acids. As they do, they release phosphorus into solution. The bacteria and the waste flow that has a higher phosphorus concentration moves into the aeration tank, and the soluble phosphorus is taken out of solution and put into the body of the bacteria. Okay, we've seen this story once before, except this time we're boosting it by creating our volatile fatty acids outside of this mainstream tank. Of course, we're going to bump into the same problem, where maybe we should be able to create more volatile fatty acids in the side stream fermenter, but the nitrate removing bacteria that are in and with the return sludge are going to preferentially eat that. So they're going to be consuming the volatile fatty acids. So there's going to be an interference with the nitrogen removing bacteria. The nitrate removing bacteria will consume VFAs. So the solution is more tanks. So we put another tank in front of that, an anoxic tank, and voila, here we go. We don't have the nitrogen interference. We create our volatile fatty acid side stream. We pump them up and over and around into the anaerobic tank. In that anoxic tank that precedes it, most of the nitrates have been removed. So we hope, so the plan is, that's the design concept, so there aren't a lot of nitrates that are coming into the anaerobic tank, and therefore whatever volatile fatty acids you create down in that fermenter, a higher percentage of them are available for the bacteria that remove phosphorus. So some process control tools now is we're going to monitor the nitrates leaving the anoxic tank, right? It's going to tell us how well that's working, in addition to the ORP in the anoxic tank. And we're going to monitor the ORP in the so-called anaerobic or fermented tank, and how much phosphorus is being released and exiting that tank. It should still be about 3 times what the phosphorus concentration in the raw wastewater is. Phosphate-rich wastewater, along with the mixed liquor, the energized bacteria move in the aeration tank. DO of maybe 2, ORP of positive 150, pH of definitely above 6.8. I'd like to see it at 7. And you should get some pretty good phosphorus removal out of that. Phosphorus removal being the soluble gets in and with the mixed liquor. And then we remove that in the secondary clarifier. So here's some rules of thumb. Approximate in the anaerobic tank. Don't really need a lot of hydraulic retention time. Need a nice anaerobic condition, -200, -225, -300. It's down to -300 if there's a lot of sulfur in the wastewater, then it starts to smell bad. Typically -200, -250 typically doesn't smell that bad. If you don't have a lot of sulfur, you can get to -400 without really having odors. Need a lot of BOD. Look at that one. 25 times. So if your influent is 7, 6 or 7, you want to remove 4. So you want to remove 4 milligrams per liter of phosphorus. You need 100 milligrams per liter BOD. 200 is even better. So if you have a primary clarifier, if you've got a lot of nice pre-treatment going on, removing your BOD, they're stealing what you need to drive phosphorus removal. Right. Quite frankly, they're also stealing what you need to drive nitrogen removal. You may remember last week I talked about for nitrogen removal, you need 5 to 10 times as much. So now we got to add them together. So if you're trying to remove 20 parts of nitrogen, you need at least 100 milligrams per liter of BOD for that, another 4 milligrams per liter of phosphorus, and another 100 milligrams per liter. We need 200 milligrams per liter of the kind of BOD that gets consumed in the first couple hours, not on the 3rd, 4th, or 5th day of being in the BOD bottle. So during storm events, when there's a lot of infiltration inflow, the concentrations are going to go down, and it's going to adversely impact our phosphorus removal. All right, in the aeration tank, we need a high dissolved oxygen concentration. The textbooks say 2 milligrams per liter. I suppose that's a good number. Me, I'm a big fan of the ORP once again. So I really like to see an active exchange of the consumption of the oxygen, and that's measured by the ORP. So about a positive 150 seems to be the sweet spot at many of the facilities I work with. pH I discussed, we need at least neutral pH, and if we got everything right, which no more than you get it right, something will go wrong, but if you got it all right, the soluble concentration of phosphorus will be crazy low. Any questions or comments on any of this?
Hey, Grant, you might have mentioned this, but what volume or percentage of the flow do you need in that? How big does your fermentation tank have to be?
Fermentation tank should hold about 2 hours flow. So if you got, do the math. So I don't know what 1 million gallons per day is per hour, 1/24 of a million times 2. So 1/12 of a million gallons a day. So you need something under 100,000 gallons, 75, 100,000 gallons for a 1 MGD facility. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
You bet. All right. Now we're going to leave the design engineers aside. We've learned from the scientists, hopefully, that very initial chemistry with the ORP and showing about that. And we've got the mainstream and side stream. So now let's look and spend the rest of the session today talking about working with what we have, okay? If we're not fortunate enough to have a plant designed for phosphorus removal, what are we going to do with this piece that we're...
Hey, Grant, quick question, sorry.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if this got entirely answered, but what depth and location of the ORP probe in the tank? That's a question from Jody Field.
All right, that's a great question. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to answer that as I show the next few schematics, because that's important. It's a good question. You're measuring ORP. Where do you measure, and how deep? And it matters. So let's get to that. But first, I got to give credit here. We've got Dave Harris of the Miles City, Montana hat on the left, and Pete Betticher that works for Montana DEQ. The state guy's a good guy, wears a white hat. Some work we were doing in Montana. So if there's less than 3 times the amount of soluble phosphorus leaving this anaerobic tank, how do you fix that? And this is where the answer to that question about how you measure the ORP is going to come in handy. Most anaerobic tanks are mixed. There's mechanical mixers. So if it's mixed, it really doesn't matter where you take the ORP. Top, bottom, front, back. It's fairly well mixed. But if that tank is not sufficiently anaerobic, if it's mixed and you've got an ORP probe in there and it's -50, then that's not anaerobic enough. You're going to have a hard time getting good biological phosphorus removal. So the solution is pretty simple. Turn off the mixer. Turn off the mixer. Let solids settle to the bottom of that tank. And as they do, they're going to create an anaerobic blanket. It's a septic tank. If you get real creative, you can actually pipe the influence so that it maybe diverts down near the bottom of the tank so that raw wastewater will interact with the sludge, and even more importantly, the return. The percentage of the bacteria that are in that return sludge, if they can interact with the material settled on the bottom, that's the area now that we want to drive into a -200, -250. So if you're running the facility with the mixers off, the top and bottom is going to give you completely different numbers. So for process control, you're going to need to put that ORP down into the area that's settling, the area where you're creating the fermented zone. Now, obviously, if you never turn the mixer on, you're going to settle out an awful lot of your mixed liquor, and your aeration tank mixed liquor concentration is going to decline. So typically what folks will do is they'll run their mixer for 15 minutes every 6 hours, every 12 hours. A lot of folks get away with just running it once a day. If you run it just once a day, I'd like to see it run more than 15 minutes. Resuspend whatever's in there. There's a plant style in Kansas where they use a lot of air mixing. I aerate the bejeebers out of it for 30 minutes a day just to resuspend all that material. And then the rest of the time let it settle and be anaerobic. So if you're set up and you're just not getting the 3 times the phosphorus, soluble phosphorus leaving your anaerobic zone, you probably need to boost the anaerobic zone, make it more anaerobic. And the easiest way to do that is to look at it 3-dimensionally. Look at the bottom layer, make it anaerobic, and then for process control, that's where you're going to want to monitor conditions. Now, if your facility is getting 3 times the phosphorus removal coming out of that anaerobic zone like it's supposed to, but you still have a high number in the effluent, there's probably 1 of 2 things happening. Something's wrong in the aeration tank. And I'll tell you that something that's wrong in the aeration tank is probably pH. Can also be not enough dissolved oxygen. That's an easy fix unless you're limited on your ability to provide aeration. So you're going to want to work on that. And in this condition, again, since it's aerated, where you take the DO or the ORP doesn't matter all that much, but probably in the first third of the tank would be about the ideal spot, about a third of the way through the tank. Definitely need this pH. Like I said, it goes a day of 6.8, less than 6.8, biological phosphorus stops dead. Real common problem. Better phosphorus removal in the winter, not as good in the summer. Grant has a theory. I think maybe it's a one-man band on this theory, but I'm going to share it with you because I believe in it pretty strongly. I've got some circumstantial evidence that supports it from more than one facility, Athens, Tennessee being one of them. If their BOD is not that high coming into this treatment plant, what I've seen is the BOD, particularly if there's an anoxic zone, by the time the BOD leaves the anoxic zone, by the time it leaves this anaerobic zone, there's really almost no BOD left. The aeration tank is hardly removing BOD. We collected samples where the BOD, as it's going into the aeration tank, is in the teens. If there's too little BOD going in the aeration tank, you can't grow bacteria. There's no place for them to grow. There's no building blocks for them to put together to create new bacteria. So BOD is a lot of BOD is helpful not only to create the volatile fatty acids, some BOD needs to bleed into the aeration tank so we can grow bacteria. So if the phosphorus leaving that anaerobic zone, if it's performing as you'd like, you got a nice negative ORP, you have a phosphorus release in there, but it's not pulling the soluble phosphorus out in the aeration tank, it's most likely pH or ORP, or if it's a seasonal issue, could be you have enough BOD because the bacteria are slower growing in the cold weather. They don't all get consumed, or the BOD doesn't get consumed, excuse me. Excuse me, the BOD doesn't get consumed in your prior to going to the aeration tank, because in colder weather, everything's moving slower. But in warmer weather, perhaps it is, and therefore the efficiency drops off. There's a second possibility. The aeration tank may be working for you. Okay, so how do you test that? You test the soluble phosphorus leaving the aeration tank. If it's low, all right, your anaerobic tank's working, your aeration tank's working, we're getting a re-release. And this happens more often in the summertime. Warmer weather, phosphorus can be in very low levels coming out of the aeration tank. If you have a high sludge blanket in the secondary clarifier, you're going to get some decay of the bacteria, right? Endogenous respiration. And as there's some decay, phosphorus is released. Seen cases where it's the soluble phosphorus is 0.0 some number going into the clarifier, and it's over 1 coming out of the clarifier. All right, these are all hints as to why on any one day it might be more coming out than it is coming in. You're getting this re-release. You're getting re-release in the secondary clarifier. Here's the one case in our business where there is such a thing as too much clarifier. Too much retention time in the clarifier can result in phosphorus release. So you can get better treatment with less clarifiers. Take clarifiers offline, increase the return rate, lower the sludge blanket. Don't let that sludge settle out. How do you sleuth this out? You profile the phosphorus, the soluble phosphorus concentration as it goes through the plant. Folks with the sophisticated treatment plants that have tight limits, that are doing it biologically year-round, typically once a week they're running a profile all the way through the plant. 3, 5, 7, 10 places in the plant, they're collecting a soluble phosphorus concentration, they're graphing that, and they're checking it week to week to confirm that all the steps are working and that they're not getting a re-release. Folks that I know running those facilities are fastidious about checking for sludge settling in pipes, tanking, tankage, any place after the aeration tank. If there's any kind of settling, they want to mix that up and don't let those solids settle, because as they do, they're going to release phosphorus. Any questions on that? I think I've got one more series of slides to go.
I would like to ask a question of the participants. Again, try to use the yes/no buttons, the check mark and the X. And the question is, how many of you have observed phosphorus release, where your effluent is higher than the influent, or that you suspect you have phosphorus release at the end of your plant? So use your check marks and let me know how it looks at your plant. And I believe it's going to be more in the summer than in the winter. So it will be very sporadic. But if you have experienced anything like that, click a yes. Okay.
And let's do a follow-up to that when that's done.
That sounds good. Okay, we'll give it a little bit more. We have answers coming in really good. They're both on both sides of the spectrum. We got 6 yeses and 17 no's. So we're about, we have some, but not majority. And we're ready for the follow-up question.
All right, so you got to uncheck those, right? So you got to uncheck that. And then
uncheck yourselves.
So my question is, how many of you are getting, who track phosphorus, are getting better removal in the winter months than you are in the summer? So yes is better in the winter. No is not, haven't noticed that, and not answering at all is not my department.
Okay. Who has better removal in the winter? click yes. And if you answered no before, you need to unclick it so we're not reading last question. Answers. We have 6 yeses, 11 no's.
Okay, all right.
Very interesting. Thank
So
you,
a third of
everybody.
you have noticed it, and 2/3 haven't. Okay, that's good information. I suspect as it becomes more intense, the concern about phosphorus, possibly more of you will start noticing it. I'll be curious. Looks like somebody had raised their hand. Maybe we need to unmute them and they want to ask a question, which would be fabulous.
Mark has asked a question. Very good. So, Allie, we need help here. I don't know how to do the unmute.
I think, does Mark just undo himself, or?
He can try, but.
Sorry, I'm trying to scroll through and find people who have their hands. Hold on. How about, well, I don't want to unmute everybody. Who needs?
It might have been an accident. Sometimes people hit the button. But if you meant to raise your hand, Mark, I didn't get your last name.
It's Kalkworth.
There we go.
Yeah. I don't know how to do this thing. So
You're on.
There you are, Mark.
I was trying to. You asked some questions about how many of us had such and such occur and all that. Well, that didn't show up on my screen, and so I'm trying to push buttons and find it. And I don't know what this hand hole thing is, so I pushed that button by accident. Sorry.
Right. Now you know how to ask questions. You know, you can
I guess I do. I guess so. I don't know.
That was good. Yeah, they're asking just verbally the questions.
I never use this kind of machinery myself, so this computer machinery, so I don't know how it works.
Yes, you're doing good. And then next to the head is the check mark and the X that people are clicking to do the answers. And we
I don't get that screen.
So thank you.
Anyway, whatever.
Oh no, thank you.
Thank
and
you.
If you have a question, just raise a hand. You know, it's perfectly fine. Back to you, Grant.
All right. Well, this isn't. We're way on the downhill slope, approaching the end here. So, all right. We've talked about mainstream phosphorus plants designed for mainstream. We've talked about plants designed for combination of side stream and mainstream. We talked about troubleshooting those, and if you've got a plant, kind of. You're not getting the phosphorus release, you're getting the release, but then you're not getting the uptake. And so we've done all of that. Now we're down to, I've got a treatment plant not really designed for phosphorus removal, biological phosphorus removal. What now, wise guy? And my answer is almost always going to be look to side stream. So here's a plant that's grown or designed for phosphorus removal. So let's erase these things that were added for phosphorus removal. And let's bring it back to a more conventional treatment plant. Now, how the heck are you going to get phosphorus removal out of that? Probably isn't going to happen in that main part going across the top, the primary, the aeration, or the secondary clarifier. We've got to look to the sludge tank. And the primary sludge is not of value to us because we can go septic with the gravity, with the primary sludge, but there's no phosphorus removing bacteria in there. So we need to focus on the waste activated sludge. And this frankly is a pretty doggone simple fix. So you take an existing sludge storage tank or find something that you can make into a sludge storage tank. In the case of Norris, Tennessee, they're using 2 of the cube chemical feed totes. They call them IBC totes. They're about 300 gallons each. They're using 2 of those, pumping some return sludge into that, letting it sit for a couple of days. It ferments, creates volatile fatty acids. Then they're pumping those volatile fatty acids back into their aeration tank. And they're not knocking it out of the park yet, but they've cut their phosphorus in half from 4 to 2, and they're having months where it's well below 0.5, like last month, for example. So a fairly simple, certainly when you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars to build a plant for phosphorus removal, or more likely millions of dollars, to figure out some way to cycle, take some return sludge, which of course is organically rich. It has the bacteria in it. You let that sit for 2 to 4 to 5 days so it ferments, becomes septic, and then you take that same sludge, the bacteria and all, and pump it back into the treatment plant. We're not just taking the volatile fatty acids, now we got to bring the bacteria back into the treatment plant. And as we do that, it's been working well in a number of facilities. Another alternative is to create dead spots, as I talked before, and we're seeing that in some oxidation ditches, and I'll talk about that when we do focus exclusively on oxidation ditches, that some folks are able to run the three-dimensionally so that during the air off cycles, they're getting a deposition of sludge in the bottom, which is creating the volatile fatty acids. So I think that is pretty much the end. We have one more survey question. If there's any questions about my presentation first, we can do that, or you can ponder that while they do the survey question, and then we'll wrap it up. So back to you, Allie.
Hey, Grant, I got a question before we move to the poll. On that, back to that homegrown side stream, how do you prevent the nitrogen, the nitrifier interference?
You don't prevent it. Then what happens is it's not going to be as efficient of a system if you have a lot of nitrates, right? However, think it through now. If there's some what we're doing is on the side stream, and I'll bring it back up when the poll's over, your waste sludge is sitting there long enough, so the very same bacteria that need to eat the VFAs are just sitting there without a lot of flow through of nitrates. So even though there may be some nitrates in the stream, you're not having gallons of it. It's just sitting there for a little while. It's going to chew them up and then continue to go septic and continue to create volatile fatty acids. So they'll interfere, but maybe not as much in some of the other schemes. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't know. It kind of seemed like I talked in a circle there. All right, we got our last poll question. It's really a question to see that if the guy that just yabbered at you for an hour and 3/4, if you learned anything. And we'd like to know, because that's the whole point of this.
Yes, and while people are finishing up the poll, if you didn't get a chance to complete the one poll where, or the one question where we asked if there were multiple people listening with you to provide their operator license numbers, please feel free to email me those additional license numbers. Again, if you have already registered and put your license number in there, I don't need yours again. I just need if somebody didn't register, but they also attended with you in your, like say your office, so there were 3 or 4 people with you. So hold on, I'm going to put again my email address in the chat section, and you can send that to me as well. I think we have 68 out of 83 people have completed the poll. Do you want me to go ahead and close it out?
I'm ready.
Okay. It just takes a few seconds. Here we go. You should be able to see the results there.
All right, a lot of humility there in Tennessee. That's I like that. Don't want to consider yourself experts. All right, if you flip it back to me, I will wrap this up. Well, thanks to all these people and more. There's this, been doing this for a few years, been to over 100 treatment plants, but there wouldn't be a story to tell if it wasn't for the operators who took the chance and tried these things that I'm talking about. And that wouldn't have happened without folks in the regulatory community supporting that, right? Trying to get folks to move in advance of permit requirements, and we want to support them in that effort. TDEC's been great that way. That's a concern of yours. You got a third party looking over your shoulder. I'm sure Karina would enjoy hearing from you, and she'll muster some forces to give you support. Where we're going from here, next week should be a lot more fun. We're going to dive into a lot of case studies. Treatment plants are operating differently than they were designed to run and are getting nitrogen and or phosphorus removal. And we want to talk about that. What are they doing, and how's it working for them, and what's that mean to you? And then we'll get in very specific on oxidation ditch, SBRs, and conventional activated sludge treatment plants, a whole series. And again, I certainly invite emails from any of you, or you can, through the various methods of talking to the presenters, let your interest be known. Get more folks interested in talking about their plants with this audience, and we'll have an aerial view of your plant, talk about what you'd like to see happening, what is working, what isn't working for you, what your limitations are, and use that as an exercise for an operator exchange, a discussion, and maybe some good ideas that'll help you out. So if there aren't any more questions or comments, I'll hand it back to who? Karina, you're going to take it?
I will pick it up. So thank you very much, Grant. Excellent review of phosphorus removal. I think nitrogen is a little more familiar to us. Phosphorus is a little new, as we could see from the polls as well. I have met a lot of plants that are doing phosphorus. I also want to say that phosphorus may take a little longer. We have found that the bacteria might have to actually develop and grow in your plant. They may not be quite as ready there for you as the nitrogen bugs. So it takes a bit more patience to work through.
Yep.
So thank you very much for joining us today, everybody. I hope you come again next week. If you have anybody that's interested that has not participated in the last two seminars, they can still come in. So just have them register with us. Either email me or Allie, Allie, if you would, maybe put on the screen your email address. I think that would be very helpful for folks that did not look at the chat. If you can do big font, that would be even better. So while I jibber jabber, maybe you can put the screen up there with your email. So
Okay.
any license numbers or any logistics questions, send to Allie, and also if you have, there it is, Allie's typing in her email. Or if you have anybody else that wants to register, send your interest to Allie, okay? So we're really, really happy to have you. Thank you very much for your patience, and we'll do this again next week. Really appreciate everybody's attention and participation. Have a good rest of the day, everyone.
Bye now.
Goodbye. Meeting is closed.